Diffusion, the international science radio show.
We have a bouncer on the doors of perception.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
It gets pretty exciting.
The myths, the truths.
Toxicology.
Astroseismology.
Magnetism. The dark side.
Genetically engineered potatoes.
Planetoid.
I
love that word.
Hello and welcome to Diffusion. Sit back and relax while we encapsulate weird and wonderful science delivered directly into your ears. I'm Ian Woolf. On this edition, Andrew Despi from Akin talks about our partnership with artificial intelligence.
High-speed machinery goes in. Men like you and me go out.
Yes, machines come in and men go out. Everywhere the same story. These whirring wheels spinning faster, ever faster. A mighty crescendo of production. They typify a constantly changing industry. An industry that ever seeks to do its appointed work cheaper and quicker and better.
AI. Replace, destroy, or enhance. Andrew Despi is Director of Ecosystems at Akin, an artificial intelligence company based in San Francisco and Sydney. Akin's mission is to ensure the responsible co-evolution of humans and AI. I began by asking Andrew, some people have seen artificial intelligence as replacing us, some people see artificial intelligence destroying us, and some people see artificial intelligence lifting us up or joining with us. What role does artificial intelligence play in your vision of the future?
It's undoubtedly all of those together. In the history of AI, there's been a kind of tension between what's called AI, artificial intelligence, and what some people call IA, which is intelligence augmentation. And you can go all the way back, and basically a lot of people were trying to build AI that could replace humans, failed, and so then they moved into the IA movement, and it led to kind of a lot of the big breakthroughs in human-computer interaction, which, if you think about it, is exactly this whole concept of how do we manage the relationship between us and technology, and how do we figure out the best way to merge with technology. That, to me, is what human-computer interaction is. That's why word processing was genius. That's why the mouse is genius. That's why tablets and touchscreens are genius. And that's why whatever comes next will be genius. But to me, the way that I think about it is putting aside the whole debate about what is AI, what's not AI, what's machine learning, and whatever. Let's just say, all the machine learning software that's out there today, let's call it AI. Let's not get into that whole thing. Now, we already, to some extent, depend on AI in our day-to-day lives. But to me, the way I think about AI is, putting aside the whole debate of is what we're using today AI or not, let's just say that all the machine learning algorithms that are out there today, they are AI. And we're using them and we've become already dependent on them. It's really hard to navigate the world that we live in today without AI. Now, if you actually think about that statement for a second, what's the actual problem? The world hasn't changed necessarily. Society at its core hasn't changed. We all still have jobs, we all still have children. Well, that's getting a bit more complicated nowadays, but at its core, society hasn't really changed. What has changed is the expectations and the way that the people around us have become augmented themselves. You'll find today people who refuse to use certain kinds of technologies, right? And they are social pariahs. It's not as bad as it used to be because I think social attitudes are changing as well. But, when people first started dropping off Facebook or refusing to use Facebook, it was like, what is wrong with you? Like, who do you think you are? Whereas now, I think we've learned enough about Facebook as a company to be a bit more understanding of those kind of people and to be more thoughtful about the way that we use it. But there's this kind of concept of every new technology starts off as being optional. Every single new technology when it comes out is used by a small group of people, the early adopters, and sometimes it just dies and we all forget about it, like the Palm tablets, the old Palm tablets from the 90s. But ultimately, once there's this network effect and enough people use a piece of technology, it goes from being optional to being mandatory. And we don't have any kind of serious conversation as a society as to how we manage this, as to how we decide what we should use, what we shouldn't use, what's good for us, what's bad for us. It's something that we all seem to just fall into unthinkingly and unknowingly, and most often driven by very clever marketing. And this applies to AI. So the amount of algorithms that we use day to day is staggering. The amount of computing power that goes behind something as simple as just finding out when the next Sydney FC game is, putting that into Google, the amount of stuff that's actually happening there is staggering. You think about the sort of computing power that was required to get us to the moon. And it's pretty mind-blowing because you kind of think, well, is that necessary? I think in the same way, in the late 90s about having a personal computer with the latest graphics card and being able to play video games, computer games, and just going, whoa, this is incredible. And then 5 years later, you look back and you're just like, wow, how could I play that? How could I sit there, look at this pixelated screen? And now we've got Retina screens, but that's not enough. We've got to have 4K and 8K and who knows what comes after that. And this kind of applies to AI. So what I'm trying to say here is that AI is already a part of us. Whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, our interaction with the world around us is mediated through AI. These algorithms determine what we see, what information we receive, and that's just a product of the immense and growing complexity of the world, especially the digital world.
So for those who think, I don't use any AI in my everyday life, I guess you'd point out to them that even the newspapers and the TV stations and the radio stations, the old media, use algorithms to work out what's going to be most popular and what they should report.
That's a very interesting question because there's sort of second order usage here. Even if you personally don't use AI, the people around you use AI. One of the things I didn't talk about transhumanism is the fact that other people are an extended part of us as well. We outsource emotions and thoughts and so on to other people. So the people around us are influenced by it, and therefore indirectly we're influenced by it. That's one part of it. If you use Netflix, you're 100% being controlled by AI. They've got literally 300 people working purely on the recommendation algorithm. That's an entire division of one of the world's largest companies dedicated to figuring out how can we keep people hypnotized to a TV so that they consume as much of our content as possible and don't do anything else useful with their lives. That's the world that we live in. So when I think about a desirable future for humans and AI, I think of it like this, and this is the way that we think about it at Akin as well. We want a future where people have got their own personal AI, where the AI might be built by someone else. And that's a whole nother thing. I think we're not that far away from people being able to construct their own AIs in the same way that people can put together their own personal computers from bits and pieces. But that's a whole nother thing. But rather than interacting with all these different organizations through their own AIs that are all optimizing for the needs of those organizations, which is ultimately profit, we should have our own personal AI that interacts on our behalf with all these services in our lives. And we think of them as helpers, companions, and coaches. And so the helper part is when you mentioned, is AI going to replace us? Yeah, 100%. AI does things for us. It automates things. There's no reason why it shouldn't. We should be able to hand over tasks to AI because it will free up our time. Now, there's a really interesting piece of research happening in the UK called the Centre for Time Use Research. And since the 60s, they've been sending out diaries broken up in 10-minute chunks to people, about 8,000 people or so, to fill it in and to say what they were doing, who they were with, and how much they enjoyed what they were doing, right? And the data that they've collected is staggering, like incredibly insightful into the human condition, and breaks down a lot of the kind of myths that we think about the modern world, like, oh, we don't sleep as much as we used to. That's nonsense. We actually sleep slightly more. This is controversial that women do all the work. Actually, the gender balance is actually kind of becoming a bit more even, and men are sharing a lot more in the unpaid work like childcare and so on. Society is becoming more equal in that way. But very interestingly, they looked at the inequality of how much time people have. Because although we all have 24 hours in the day, some of us can afford to outsource tasks to other people. And in doing so, we actually can have a lot more than 24 hours in a day. Now, this already happens. This has existed since time immemorial. People have had slaves. People have had nannies and home chefs and so on. But only rich people have had these things. So automating stuff and handing it over to free ourselves up to do higher level stuff isn't necessarily bad. Definitely not. In many ways it's good. And I think AI can play a huge part in reducing that inequality gap by kind of leveling the playing field a bit for people. So that's one thing. The second one is companions. And it's very easy to kind of go straight into, well, that's terrible. Shouldn't we be companions to each other as humans? Now, the reality is that about a third of people are lonely. That's just the reality. And what we don't necessarily want to build is AI that replaces human relationships. We want to build AI that can be there for you at any point in time when other friends can't be, when it's too expensive for you to go and get a psychologist or something like that. And I fully understand the risks and the ethical conundrum of replacing those functions with an AI. But in many ways, stuff that psychologists do oftentimes is actually pretty repeatable. There isn't a lot of rocket science to it. It's just about sitting there and listening to someone and helping them figure things out for themselves, which I think is a really important point. It should be about people figuring things out for themselves rather than outsourcing, fixing yourself, which I don't think is possible. And also, it's just this idea that if we can have this trusted relationship with an AI, it kind of enables all these other things that the AI can do for us. And so there's some really fundamental challenges in how you design a company to be able to do that, how you design for privacy, how you design for values, how you make sure that values are aligned, how you can make sure that the AI isn't enabling bad things. These are all immense challenges which are really exciting to think about, because ultimately, if we don't think about it, these corporations will build very engaging, convincible AIs that will make you feel like they care about you, but ultimately they'll only be serving those corporations' interests.
You're listening to Ian Woolf on Diffusion Science Radio. Send emails to science@diffusionradio.com. We're brought to you across Australia on the Community Radio Network and podcast over the internet on www.diffusionradio.com.
And finally, coaches, and this to me is the bit that I'm the most passionate about, which is that I think the role of AI, like the role of all technology, ideally, should be about human flourishing. It should be about lifting humans up. So although you can replace certain tasks that we do, AI really should be there to help us become better at being human. That to me is kind of how I see a softer, kinder, gentler vision for human AI coevolution. And that to me is what the holy grail is for me. The way I think about it, like one of the biggest problems that I've got, time, right? Forget about money and all the other things in our lives, but just time. We do only have limited time on this planet. That, again, is something that other transhumanists wouldn't necessarily agree with me on, that they believe that the role of technology should be to give us eternal life. That's a whole nother thing we can get into. I'm not opposed to immortality. as long as it's in a virtual world, so that there's actually room for new people to be born on this planet and to be able to experience the physical world and so on. I'd love to be able to live forever in a virtual world, go to sleep for 1,000 years when you get bored, because you're going to get bored, and then go to sleep and then see what's happening 1,000 years later, see how humanity's evolved. It'd be fascinating. I've got nothing wrong with that. But the reality is that we are all going to die, right? And how we spend our time is so, so important. And I think it's something that the vast majority of people struggle with. In my entire life, I've met less than a handful of people who I think are spot on, like completely spot on with their time management, how they assign their time because they think about it deeply and plan and so on, and they go to bed satisfied, pretty much every single night and so on. It's so incredibly hard to find someone like that. But this is not an intractable problem. This is something that having a personal AI could really help with, because it could really help us meditate on how we're spending our time. And one of my favorite quotes is from a personal hero of mine, a living cyborg. His name is Chris Dancy, and I highly recommend looking up his writings and speeches and so on, because he's one of those transhumans who started with hundreds of sensors and systems tracking every part of his life, but then slowly removed them all and kept all of the superpowers that they gave him, which to me is a really empowering story of the role that technology can play in improving humanity. And he talks about this idea that we shouldn't worry so much about valuing our schedule. We should care about scheduling our values. And I think that's beautiful, because if I had this routine, this algorithm in my brain that every morning I went through that process consciously and planned it and then checked in on how I was going and then optimized and improved how I'm spending my time, I feel like my life satisfaction would go through the roof. And I think that's something that, you can just imagine what impact this would have at a societal level if it was commonplace. What a different world we'd live in.
So what you're talking about now is augmented intelligence, people being smarter and applying that extra intelligence to every aspect of their life to improve their lives.
Yeah, I think I like that you use the word smarter, because I actually don't think smartness is necessarily about intelligence, right? I think that again is a kind of cultural trope that we've all become accustomed to believing in, the IQ test and so on. The capacity for intelligence, definitely a strong predictor of smartness. The capacity for intelligence, definitely something to want to have and very useful. But applying that capacity to intelligence to your day-to-day life, I think that's where most of us fall short. Like, let's be fair. Like, we're not dumb. We know that what we're doing day-to-day isn't optimal, and yet there's something preventing all of us from going deeply into understanding how to live a better life.
I think a lot of that is that people automate themselves. So when you learn something, you have to do it consciously, but when you get good at it, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's automated in your head. So people automate their daily lives. They automate everything they do, so they're not mentally present when they're washing their hands or whatever they're doing in their day-to-day life. Even the little things and the bigger things as well that you do enough become automated. So you've got yourself a robot while you're off dreaming, when if you were present, you could apply the intelligence you already have to everything and to improve things.
I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of people get married automatically. A lot of people fall into kind of pretty big life decisions in a fairly automatic kind of way. So that thing that you mentioned about the unconscious reminds me of something that I've only read recently that's really blown my mind, which is about how the whole unconscious works. It's a evolutionary adaptation that is designed to optimize the use of the limited resources we have in our brains. There's been some studies that have been done. None of these are exact numbers or necessarily accurate, but gives you a sense of what's going on. So at any point in time, your brain is processing, I think, 11 million bits of data, whereas your conscious part of your brain is processing about 7. The orders of magnitude is what's important here. The vast majority of the activity in our brain happens unconsciously because the conscious part uses up a lot of resources. And so the way we go from when we're babies is everything that we do is like really, really, really hard. Walking is a great example. Learning to drive is another great example. And eventually, the more you do things, the more they move into the unconscious part of your brain. This, to me, is a really beautiful analogy of how I see the development of AI happening over the next few decades. In the AI world, a lot of the debate around methods is around supervised versus unsupervised learning or semi-supervised learning. And I think unsupervised learning is really, really important just because of the limitations of humans. First of all, having access to humans. Humans are expensive, and getting them to train algorithms is very expensive. But second of all, one of the things we've learned in the last few years through AI is that a lot of human assumptions that we deduce about the world are actually wrong. And when you look at the world through a completely bottom-up inductive way, using self-learning algorithms, you discover properties and patterns that are unknown to humans. The great example is, AlphaGo beating humans and shocking the human player at its moves, the way it was playing. It had never thought about playing that way. The most recent incarnation was playing StarCraft. Humans have started copying the strategies that AI has developed by training itself on itself. So like playing against itself without any human involvement, it developed new strategies to this game, and now humans are copying that. And this might seem like it's all fun and games, but if you think about all of science and everything we know about the world, we use a lot of deductive reasoning in our day-to-day lives when it comes to making sense of the world. And all of that deductive reasoning is based off the work of human beings who've studied things. And science is something that is going to get a really big shock, I think, over the next few decades from this kind of bottom-up approach. We'll have a very different way of understanding humans, I think. If you look at all of psychology, it's full of holes. It's Swiss cheese psychology. There was a study that came out recently called Weird People. It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, Democratic. And basically 80 or something % of all psychology studies have actually been done on uni students in Western countries. And we're using that as a way for us to extrapolate and understand all of humanity. Well, you can see what's wrong with that. The big 5 personality traits have been shown to be next to useful when it comes to actual predictive ability in terms of people's behavior. So this bottom-up AI-based approach of understanding the world is going to be a radical sort of shift in how we perceive the world around us. So where that leaves us is, I think that, or I would like to see a future where AI is actually just an extension of our unconscious, where it's been designed and built in such a way that we want it to be an extension of our unconscious because we can trust it, because we know that its goals and intents are aligned with ours. And in this sense, we will probably have multiple intelligent agents that are an extended part of ourselves that will do things on our behalf, that will explain things to us, that will teach us things, that will help us connect better with other people, and that will all be optimizing for our well-being. And that is pretty much what we're trying to create at Akin.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Andrew Despi from Akin, talking about his vision of our artificial intelligence future. And that's all from us this week on Diffusion. Are you a scientist, artist, biohacker or maker who'd like to be interviewed about your work? Would your company like to sponsor Diffusion? Send your contributions, opinions, helpful suggestions and donations to science@diffusionradio.com. That's science@diffusionradio.com. Please like the Diffusion Science Radio page on Facebook and rate the show on iTunes. Tell your friends. Follow me on Twitter @Ian Woolf. Listen next week for an interview about platypus science. I produce Diffusion, which is broadcast around Australia to 28 stations on the Community Radio Network, including 2RBM in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, 8CCC in Alice Springs and Tennant Creek, 2MVR in Nambucca Valley, 3MBR in the Mallee Border districts of Victoria and South Australia, City Park Radio 7LTN in Launceston, Tasmania, 2XXFM in Canberra, and my local station 2RDJ in Burwood, New South Wales. Diffusion is syndicated globally on the National Science Foundation's Science 360 internet radio station and also on astronomy.fm. Subscribe to the podcast on the Diffusion website, www.diffusionradio.com. That's www.diffusionradio.com. And check the website for links, photos and videos about this week's show. If you enjoyed the show, you can explore more than 950 previous episodes archived on diffusionradio.com, where the shows are labelled by keywords so you can focus in on the stories you want to hear. Join my patrons at patreon.com/diffusionradio, make a donation through paypal.me/IanWolf. Subscribe to the Diffusion YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/diffusionradio. I'm Ian Woolf. Join us inside your audio device of choice for more science wondering next week on Diffusion Science Radio.
Science is fun. It helps you to learn, to know, and to appreciate. When you study science, you may go on field trips. You discover the marvelous interrelationships between all living things. You learn to read the history of the Earth as it is written in rocks and fossils. You find out what makes things tick. Everything from a molecule to a living organism. In the study of science is found the most useful and satisfying knowledge of man. Knowledge of his physical world, its past, its present, and its future. And in your moments of relaxation, now and in the years to come, you will find the study of science leading you into fascinating pursuits. Photography, collecting. Why study science? Study science because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.